Greetings, adventurer. Welcome to the Ocean County Library's 9th episode of Forge Your Imagination, a guide to immersive world-building podcast, a series that'll point creative individuals in the right direction when attempting to create your own world. I'm your host, Tom, a world-building enthusiast and professional dungeon master with over 13 years of experience. In today's episode, I will be discussing how to create a functional currency that'll support your world lore. Now, without further ado, let's get this quest on a roll. This portion is one of the more boring topics to build upon, in my personal opinion. I dislike money, math, and counting, which is strange considering how often you have to do them during Dungeons & Dragons. However, despite my preferences, don't be dissuaded, because it can become an invaluable asset to your world depending on how you use it. Now, the best way to start is by considering what type of money you would like to use. Would the world that you're building use the Earth's real currency, like the US dollar or perhaps the Japanese yen? If you would prefer to use a system that has already been created, then that's totally okay. You could skip the tedious process of creating your world's currency and instead focus on other topics within your story. However, please keep in mind that if your characters decide to travel from one place to the next, you might have to use currency conversions. For example, if your character lives in America and they decide to travel to Tokyo to defeat their rival or enemy, then they would have no influx of money to use. The character in question would be unable to use the US dollars in this scenario, so they would have to convert their US dollars to Japanese yen. However, keep in mind, this won't equate to the same amount of money. Typically, in this case, the US dollars is worth more than Japanese yen, so you would gain additional money by converting US dollars to yen. Please keep in mind that this conversion is always subject to change, so double check yourself to see if there are any changes to this. However, if you decide you did not like the idea of converting our real-world currencies, or you just wanted to create your own currency, then I would encourage you to think over these few details that I'll be discussing. Let's start this simple. Is there any connection between the world you're creating and the real world? If so, then I would encourage you to start by using part of money that already exists and then build upon it in new ways. What I mean by this is that all around the globe, we have various types of currency, and each currency has a different form. So let's start by saying, for example, our world we planned on using originated from Japan. Then we would likely start with the Japanese currency, but then backtrack it to whatever time in history we desire. After all, it doesn't have to be the current Japanese yen. Their forms of currency seem to constantly shift in different shapes, styles, designs, sizes, and materials, including gold, silver, bronze, and more over the history. What I would take by this, and normal fantasy worlds, is that they both use gold and silver, so as long as we use either the bronze or copper, then we should be good to go. We could also allow it to be a circular coin with a hollow square inside the middle, but perhaps this is where we deviate from the norm. In exchange, let's say that we decided to make this hollow square a different shape, like a triangle or a star. It can even be a different shape depending on the value of the coin. Or perhaps you decided to swap the symbols and letters engraved on the coin to dictate the meanings or names of the royal family in your world. Doing this would allow you to honor an existing currency and change it in a way that fulfills your own needs. For my first universe, I played it safe. I stuck to a regular Dungeons & Dragons currency, like gold, silver, copper. There was nothing wrong with this, and it fits well with the high fantasy universe that I was trying to create. However, for my second universe, I decided to go outside my comfort zone. I thought about it, and I pushed myself to use an existing form of currency that correlates to the mage's origins. Naturally, for an ancient magical society that came from ancient Greece, I had decided to use drachma. Then I went one step further and created my own special type of metal that was used as the highest value drachma coin that was called Boricium drachma. This special currency was never discovered by mortals in this universe, and because of this, it is incredibly rare and expensive. In the occasion that you want to make your currency from scratch, I would encourage you not to include conversions in your world unless it's going to be a very important element that you add to your story and you plan on telling. After all, with conversions, currency has the potential to complicate and convolute a story. Also, what I would encourage you to consider is that when making your currency from scratch are these three things. First and most important detail would be, what form of currency do you plan on using? Do you plan on using what the US dollar bill does, which would be linen and cotton, or would you like to go a different way and use a coin-based structure? Or perhaps you're in a sci-fi universe and you'd like to use something similar to like a credit card. The second detail to consider is, what type of material do you need? What I mean is that if your community and currency takes place underwater in the sea, then you'll most likely have to have a type of material that won't rust, corrode, or break away. Perhaps this could be as simple as a sand dollar, or as special as coral, or a rock found deep within the sea. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the community lives above an active volcano. In that case, perhaps this currency must be heat-resistant metals, like tungsten, which has a high melting point. Or perhaps it's a special currency made from compressed volcanic ashes. The third and last detail to consider is its worth. What is each form of currency worth, and why is it worth more than the others? A good example of this is how, in our economy and in fantasy worlds, a gold coin is always worth more than a silver coin. Their worths are determined by the supply and demand for each type of material and how it's made. So, of course, gold is going to cost more because of the smaller supply and demand from the general public. As a once great wizard always said, "You shall not forget." The Ocean County Library has writer and fandom-friendly events that are open to the public. We offer adult writers groups for creative writing at multiple branches, like the Brick, Jackson, Manchester, Point Pleasant Borough, and Waretown Library. If this is something you're interested in, please keep an eye out for a group near you. More information on exact dates could be found on our website, theoceancountylibrary.org, under Calendar of Events. I would also like to reiterate from the last episode that the Ocean County Library hosts their annual Fan Nation event on October 4th this year of 2025. This event has a bunch of fun programs, panels, crafts, and their very own cosplay contest at the Toms River Library. If this is something you're interested in, adventurer, please stop by. Information on future Fan Nation dates could be found on our website, theoceancountylibrary.org, under Calendar of Events. Now, adventurers, grab your anvil and hammer because it's time to return to forging your imagination. Since we have created a solid foundation for our currency, let's dive into how we should use it. We should typically create at least a general idea or list of prices for common and extravagant goods. Keeping a general thought on the prices of your universe will help keep continuity and overpowered items away from your players and or characters if you're writing a story. You don't want to make something too cheap or easy to locate in a generalized shop, because then they'd be able to buy and acquire it immediately. For example, if what they're looking for to combat their terrible nightmares is a lucid dreamer potion, then it would likely not be cheap or sold at a general store. In this case, they would most likely have to go to a specialist or a specialized shop like a potion shop or an alchemy store. It also helps to know the prices, because if you didn't set up the prices beforehand, then a character could buy, let's say, a dragon from a stingy shopkeeper, and you might have given them way too good of a deal. In this case, that stingy shopkeeper might be interpreted as a generous person, and it could ruin the scene you had planned. Then the characters or reader would question why that happened and possibly try to look further into it, where there's no way to go. It's typically best to avoid these situations so that they don't occur and break canon. As a dungeon master and world builder, I would encourage all of you adventurers to decide prices for what's important in your world. In my world of Solera, it is a world hidden behind magic in the real world that we live in. So I made prices for general goods, like clothes, accessories, camp and travel supplies, like a tent, sleeping bag, water canister, and stuff like that, as well as the prices for foods and drinks. I also broke it down into different sections that would dictate what the prices for good food was, like a 5-star meal versus poorly made food or something like jerky. Also, since my world revolves around familiars and taming creatures, I added prices for tiers of familiars, for regular, common creatures, as well as like magical, fantastical beasts, and their gear, like collars, saddles, and kibble. Lastly, I added in more of magical elements, like gems, herbs, potions, staffs, wands, and new types of metals that I had created that can be used to hold magical enchantments. However, when it comes to charging money for potions and herbs, you have to be careful. I say this because you don't want to leave continuity errors or opportunities. Let me provide you with an example of how this could create a continuity error. In Solera, I have a potion called a Persuasion Potion, which grants the user increased odds of winning an argument or persuading someone to do something. If someone drinks this potion, everything they say becomes a persuasive argument due to the change in the frequency of their words. People say that their tone of voice makes them sound like honey. Now, because of its useful properties in my universe, this is worth 12 platinum drachma, which is a good chunk of money. The ingredients include various amounts of acorns, cardamom, ginger, hibiscus, Irish moss, and lastly, siren mucus. But if the price for the ingredients alone costs 13 platinum drachma, then it's impossible for the potion to be sold at such a low cost. The same can be said for the opposite. If the herbs or other ingredients for the potion are very cheap, then it makes no sense for the finished product to be so expensive. One exception to this is if you have to do a lot of work to prepare it, or if it's on a specific time crunch or constraint to finish. After creating the currency, its worth, and general prices of what materials are worth, I would encourage you adventurers to dive into occupations. If an energized potion that a watchguard needs to drink to stay awake is 1 silver, and his mortgage or rent is about 80 silver, then he would need at minimum to be making around 111 silver a month, because 1 silver over a whole month is around 31 energized potions that he would need. By that logic, without counting food or anything else, that's what he would need for himself and his family. He would also likely not be able to go out to eat at night at a fancy restaurant that cost any silver pieces, which also means that bribing a guard to look the other way or let someone into the building that he was guarding would at least require a few months of rent to risk the guard losing his job. Another way to do this is to pay a person based on their skill and what they provide. So, if the least skilled carpenter or apprentice got paid around 30 copper for the chair that they made, and the best skilled carpenter got paid around 30 silver for the chair that they made. That is a huge difference. The difference is decided by their skill, experience, and title, but it would be comparable to their needs to survive in this economy. They can't be making so little money that, they can't afford to eat or have basic necessities, because that wouldn't create a very functional society. I would also like to mention that the people who have a highly desired job or fill a role that not many people are willing to do would bring them a higher influx of pay. So what it comes down to is deciding what occupations are worth what in your world that you make. If your community that you are developing has an abundance of monsters, then the guards would likely be paid more than the typical person. However, if your community is built on a river, then maybe fishermen are more common, and that means that boat builders would be a more lucrative job opportunity because they are needed to build their boats. My last advice is to create new occupations geared towards your world. These can be current occupations that exist in our real world that you alter to fit the role that you want. The contrast, it'll make it more interesting. Let me provide you with an example. If I told you that my dad was a pirate, you probably wouldn't think too highly of them, right? However, in my universe, this profession is the opposite of one might expect. In this universe, they're well-respected and honorable warriors who have a high honor code and protect the coast from sea monsters and powerful entities like that of the Hydra and Leviathans. After hearing all of that, a reader or player would most likely change their opinion on that individual or profession. Although that's all I have for today, adventurers. Tune in on our next episode as we delve into fun, extended lore ideas that your world technically does not need, but can benefit from. This episode will have various topics and ideas that can be crafted into interesting world lore that'll help the world that you're building seem more unique.
If you are hearing this message, you've officially listened to the entire episode, and for that, I'd like to thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please take a look over some of our other OCL Soundwaves podcasts. Feel free to leave us a rating on Spotify, Radio Public, and Pocket Casts. Most importantly, safe travels, adventurers.